He, the powerful Don, surrenders to the desire to be normal by giving himself to an ordinary woman. They say an object's true value lies in the story it tells. But for Livia Romano, one night in New York would trap her in a story that wasn't her own. She is an art appraiser, a woman who understands history, value, and truth. Her world is one of quiet libraries and careful analysis. She finds herself at an exclusive event in a grand mansion perched over the Hudson, a world of shadows and power far from her own. She is drawn not to an artifact, but to the host. His name is Massimo Cacciatore, a man of quiet charisma, surrounded by beauty but seemingly weighed down by a silent burden. Their connection is immediate, a spark of truth in a room full of polite fictions, culminating in a spontaneous night that feels like destiny. But their night of passion shatters at dawn. The beautiful mansion reveals itself to be a fortress, and the charming host is unmasked as Don Massimo, the Lion Cacciatore, the new head of one of New York's most powerful families. She discovers she has stumbled into a world governed by honor, tradition, and blood. By being found in his bed, she has broken a sacred vow he was meant to make with another, and now, a war between the city's most dangerous clans is imminent. To save his life, an impossible lie is forged by his formidable grandmother. Livia was never a mistake. She was always his secret fiancée. This is the story of how a single night becomes an unbreakable vow. It's a tale of a lie so powerful it must become the truth, and of a modern, independent woman forced to navigate a brutal world of ancient rules. She wasn't looking for a cage, but she found one made of honor and duty. He wasn't looking for love, but he found it in the woman who could destroy him. So, take a deep breath, and let one desperate lie pull you into our story. Comment with a ring emoji if you believe a lie told to save a life can become its own kind of truth, and subscribe for more tales of powerful men and the women caught in their dangerous games. Get ready for a story that proves the most dangerous cage isn't made of steel, but of a diamond ring and a sacred vow. It's a story about a brilliant appraiser, and the Don who made her his accidental bride. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The air in the Cacciatore mansion's library was thick with the weight of history. Livia felt it in her bones, a subtle vibration that rose through the soles of her expensive shoes and settled in her chest. It smelled of old leather, aged paper, and the faint lemon polish used on the vast expanse of mahogany that surrounded her. It was a scent she knew intimately, the aroma of captured time. But here, in this house perched over the Hudson like a disguised fortress, there was something more, an undercurrent of power, silent and unyielding. She ran a fingertip along the spine of a calfskin-bound book, feeling the worn texture beneath her skin. Her job was to appraise the family's collection of Renaissance manuscripts, a task that had pulled her from her quiet Boston apartment and thrown her into the epicenter of New York high society for one night. The exhibition event was buzzing in the grand ballroom down the hall. The sound was a distant murmur, a wave of muffled laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. Livia, however, had found her refuge here, among the ghosts of unread words. "Found something that interests you more than my party, Ms. Romano?" The voice was low, a smooth baritone with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in the dark wood around her. Livia didn't startle. She had felt his presence before he spoke, a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, like the drop in air pressure before a storm. She turned slowly. Massimo Cacciatore was leaning against the doorframe, a glass of amber whiskey in one hand. He wasn't the tallest man in the room, nor the most ostentatious. The others wore power like an expensive coat, something to be displayed. He wore it like his own skin, an innate and inseparable part of who he was. His eyes, a brown so dark they seemed almost black, watched her with a quiet intensity that sent an unexpected warmth creeping up her neck. "I'm just acquainting myself with the competition, Mr. Cacciatore," Livia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's hard for an inanimate object to compete with top-shelf Prosecco and salmon canapes." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was a melancholy there, a responsibility that seemed to weigh on his broad shoulders beneath the perfectly tailored suit. "And who's winning?" "These books," she said, gesturing to the shelves. "They don't require small talk." He took a step into the room, the sound of his leather shoes on the Persian rug nearly inaudible. The silence he brought with him was thicker than the party's murmur. They have their own stories, though, more honest than most of what you'll hear tonight. Livia felt her heart stumble. This was it. This was the quality that had intrigued her since she first saw him, greeting guests with formal grace. He seemed like a man playing a role, and only in those fleeting moments when his gaze drifted into the distance did she see the real person underneath, a man trapped. "History is my specialty," she said, turning back to the bookshelf, an unnecessary gesture that betrayed her nervousness. "It's why I'm here. I know who you are, Ms. Romano. Your reputation precedes you." He was closer now. She could feel the warmth emanating from his body, could smell him, a blend of whiskey, clean starch, and something subtly masculine, like sandalwood. It was intoxicating. You see the value others miss, the truth beneath the layers of varnish. Their eyes met, and the outside world seemed to retreat. The party, the books, the house itself, all dissolved into the intensity of that gaze. He wasn't talking about antiques. She knew it. He was talking about the people in that room, about himself. The attraction was immediate, an electric current that arced in the space between them. It was illogical, dangerous. She was here for a job, a professional task that required distance and objectivity. But the way he looked at her stripped her of all her professional armor. He saw her, not the appraiser, not the expert, but the woman who hid behind a sharp intellect and designer glasses. "Sometimes," she whispered, her mouth suddenly dry, "the truth is the most dangerous thing of all." "Only when it's discovered," he answered, his voice even lower. The hours that followed passed in a surreal blur. Massimo led her out of the library, not back to the crowd, but down a side hall and into his private study. The party continued without its host, a ship sailing on calm waters while its captain navigated a private storm. The study was the heart of the house. More books, old maps framed on the walls, and a vast oak desk that looked as though it had witnessed generations of secrets. He poured her more whiskey, though she'd barely touched her champagne. They didn't talk about the manuscripts. They talked about journeys they'd never taken, about the weight of expectations, and about the strange loneliness one can feel in a crowded room. Livia found herself telling him things she had never confessed to anyone, about the pressure to be the best in her field, about the silence of her apartment after a long trip, and he listened. He offered no solutions or platitudes. He simply listened, his dark eyes fixed on her, making her feel as if she were the only person in the world. She felt her heart hammer against her ribs, a frantic rhythm at odds with the room's quiet. "This is madness," a part of her brain screamed. "You don't know him. You don't know this world." But another part, a part she had kept locked away for a long time, didn't care. She felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and addictive. When he stood and came to her side by the window, the glow of city lights across the river painting silhouettes in the room, the air became electric. He stopped in front of her, so close she could see the small lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He raised his hand, not to touch her, but to trace the outline of a rose carved into the window frame. His finger paused a millimeter from her cheek. "You shouldn't be here, Livia," he said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded like a confession, a warning, to her and to himself. "I know," she answered, her voice just a breath. The control he held so tightly then broke. He leaned in, his hand finally finding her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone with a tenderness that belied the powerful aura surrounding him. The touch was liquid fire, spreading through her veins. She closed her eyes, savoring the sensation, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a tender or hesitant kiss. It was a kiss of surrender, a kiss that spoke of restrained hunger, of shared loneliness, and of a desperate need to find one moment of truth in a world built on lies. His stubble grazed her soft skin, a delightful contrast. The taste of him still lingered on her lips, a mix of whiskey and longing. Her hands went to his hair, her fingers tangling in the thick strands as she pulled him closer. His body was warm, solid, potent against hers. A man made to command. A man who, in that moment, was hers. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her out of the study, up a back staircase that Livia hadn't noticed. Each step echoed the beat of her heart. Every shared glance was a silent promise. It was wrong. It was reckless. And yet, it felt like the only real thing that had happened all night. He took her to a room where the only light was from the moon, bathing the silk sheets in a silvery glow. What followed was not just a moment of passion, but a silent confession. A meeting of two solitudes, a refuge found in the quiet of the night. It was the beginning of something beautiful and dangerous, a secret that by dawn would change their lives forever. Livia awoke to softness. The first thing she registered was the light, a pale, milky beam of autumn sun pouring through the window, painting a golden stripe across the Egyptian silk sheets. The air was cool and smelled of the night before of him, a blend of sandalwood, whiskey, and the unmistakable scent of his skin. She stirred, feeling the satisfied protest of muscles she didn't know she had. She awoke to softness. She was nestled not just against the warmth beside her, but in the silence that follows a confession, a proximity that went beyond reason. Something deep and irrevocable had shifted between them in the quiet of the night. She opened her eyes slowly. Massimo was asleep. In repose, the dawn's mask fell away completely. The lines of tension around his mouth had softened, and his face, turned toward her, looked younger, almost vulnerable. A lock of dark hair fell across his forehead. The urge to reach out and brush it away was almost irresistible. She felt a pang in her chest, a dangerous and unfamiliar tenderness. She allowed herself a moment to simply watch, to burn the image into her mind. The tranquility of this silent fortress, the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. For the first time in a long time, Livia didn't feel like an expert appraising an artifact. She felt like part of the story. That's when the sound reached her. A muffled noise from downstairs, the sharp, authoritative slam of a door. It wasn't the sound of a house slowly waking. It was the sound of an invasion. Instantly, the body beside her changed. Massimo didn't wake up. He was activated. His arm tightened around her in a spasm, and his eyes snapped open. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory alertness. His body, once a haven of warmth, became a tense marble statue. He said nothing, just listened, his head tilted slightly. The silence that followed the initial sound was worse. It was a silence that held weight, expectation. "Massimo?" Livia's voice was a whisper, broken by the stillness. He placed a finger on her lips, a gesture demanding absolute silence. He uncoiled from her with a noiseless fluidity, slipping out of bed like a panther. In seconds, he had pulled on a pair of dark sweatpants that were draped over a chair. Every movement was economical, precise, born of an instinct Livia couldn't comprehend. The man who had kissed her with surrender last night was gone. In his place was the guardian of the fortress, the lion cacciatore. Footsteps, coming up the stairs, slow, deliberate, measured. The sound was accompanied by a rhythmic click, the tap of wood on wood. Someone using a cane. Massimo turned to her, and the urgency in his dark eyes sent an icy chill down Livia's spine, eradicating the warmth of the sheets. "Get dressed," he hissed. "Now!" She fumbled, panic rising in her throat. Her clothes were scattered on the floor, a trail of her recklessness. She pulled on her silk dress, her hands shaking so badly she could barely find the straps. The fabric felt cold and accusing against her bare skin. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The clicking of the cane ceased. The silence stretched, pulled taut like a wire about to snap. Massimo stood motionless in the center of the room, his back to the door, his broad shoulders tense. He was a barrier between her and whatever was on the other side. The doorknob turned slowly, without the warning of a knock. The door opened to reveal a woman. She was not tall, but her presence filled the room, sucking out the air and the light. She wore a simple, impeccably cut black dress, and her pure white hair was pulled into a severe bun at the nape of her neck. In her hand, she held a dark wood cane with a polished silver handle. Her face was a map of fine wrinkles, but her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, were ageless. They were eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that could dissect a man's soul with a single glance. She took in the scene, the disheveled room. Livia standing beside the bed in her rumpled dress, her nakedness barely covered by the thin fabric. But her gaze settled on Massimo. There was no shock or anger in her expression. There was something far more terrifying. Disappointment and a calculating coldness. Nonna. Massimo's voice was taut, a steel cord stretched to its limit. The woman, his grandmother, stepped inside, the click of her cane on the hardwood floor sounding like a judge's gavel. "So, this is how you honor your father's legacy," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, without the tremor of age. Each word was a shard of ice. "Bringing a stranger to the bed that should belong to your fiancé, on the eve of the announcement." Livia felt the floor vanish. Fiancé? Announcement? The words spun in her head, devoid of meaning. She looked at Massimo, searching for a denial, an explanation, anything. But he didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on his grandmother's, a silent battle of wills being waged in the sunlit room. "Isabella and her father arrive in 1 hour for breakfast," the nonna continued, her tone relentless. "A breakfast to seal the agreement, to ensure the peace your father died to build. A peace you have just placed on a powder keg with this." Her piercing blue gaze finally turned to Livia, assessing her not as a person, but as a complication, an unwanted variable in an equation of power. "Who are you?" the old woman asked, the question not one of curiosity, but of accusation. Livia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her name, her profession, her entire life seemed insignificant, irrelevant in the face of this crushing reality. "She has nothing to do with this," Massimo said, stepping forward, shielding Livia with his body. "The fault is mine." The nonna let out a sound that might have been a laugh, had it not been so devoid of humor. "Fault? Fault is an indulgence for children, Massimo. We deal in consequences, and the consequences of a cacciatore breaking his word to a Vitucci are war. Do you understand? Not a business dispute. War. Blood in the streets. The end of everything we have fought to hold. Vitucci. Cacciatore." The names sounded like alarm bells in Livia's mind. Names she had read in newspapers, associated with court cases, with violence, with a world that people like her only glimpsed in movies. That world. The underworld of power. The air in her lungs turned to stone. The man with whom she had shared secrets, with whom she had found a refuge, was not just a wealthy, powerful man. He was a don, a chief. And she, an art appraiser from Boston, had just slept with him on the eve of his arranged engagement to the daughter of a rival clan. She felt the blood drain from her face, the room starting to spin. She grabbed the bedpost to steady herself. The nonna observed her reaction with a detached interest, like a scientist observing a specimen. She paced the room, her cane clicking, her pale blue eyes taking in every detail. She stopped by the window, looking out at the city sprawling below. "Honor," she said, more to herself than to them. Such a fragile thing, so easily broken, and so impossible to mend. She turned, and for the first time, Livia saw a spark of something beyond ice in her eyes. It was the glint of steel being forged, the mind of a strategist at work. "There is no hiding this," the nonna continued. "The house has eyes and ears. The moment the Vituccis arrive, they will know. They will smell the dishonor in the air. And Massimo's blood will be the price demanded." Livia's panic morphed into pure, absolute terror. His life was in danger because of her, because of one night. Massimo stepped toward his grandmother. "I will handle this, nonna. I will speak to Don Vitucci. I will take responsibility." "You will take nothing but your grave," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air. "You are the lion. You have shown weakness. To them, there will be no other answer but death." The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Livia could hear the sound of her own heart pounding in her ears. It was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Then, the nonna's eyes fixed on Livia again. The look was no longer one of contempt. It was something new, appraising, intense. An idea was forming behind that wrinkled facade, a terrible and brilliant idea. "No," the nonna said, her voice low and laden with the weight of an irrevocable decision. Honor was not broken. Massimo stared at her, confusion clouding his tense features. "Nonna, what—" "There was no betrayal," the matriarch declared, her voice gaining strength, each word a brick in the construction of a new reality. She took a step toward Livia, who instinctively shrank back, because a man cannot betray his fiancée with the woman to whom he has already promised. Livia's world stopped spinning. It stopped completely. "This woman," the nonna said, her chin high, looking at her grandson with an iron command, "is no stranger. She is the reason the deal with the Vituccis could never have been finalized. She is, and always has been, your secret fiancé, Massimo." The lie hung in the air, so audacious, so monumental, it seemed to have a physical presence. It was a desperate fiction, woven on the spot to save a life and avert a war. "Your night together was not a mistake," the nonna concluded. Her blue eyes locked on Livia, pinning her in place, sealing her fate. It was destiny, and now the entire world will know it. The nonna's words hung in the air, not as a suggestion, but as the foundation of a new and terrible reality. Your secret fiancé. To Livia, the phrase sounded like a foreign language, a set of disconnected sounds her mind refused to assemble. The room, which moments before had been a sanctuary of passion, now constricted around her, the walls closing in. The golden morning sun seemed to mock her, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a witness to her impending imprisonment. Livia's first impulse was to laugh, a hysterical, borderline insane laugh that bubbled in her chest and died in her throat. But looking at the two faces before her, Massimo's, a mask of resigned shock, and his grandmother's, as impassive as granite, she understood this was no joke. "No," the word escaped her lips, faint, a wisp of sound. She tried again, injecting it with a strength she didn't feel. "No, absolutely not. This is insane." She took a step back, her body instinctively seeking distance, escape. Her pleading eyes found Massimo's. Tell her this is impossible. I have a life, a job. I'm not a part of this. I'm not like you," is what she wanted to scream. Massimo finally moved. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of restrained frustration. His jaw was locked. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, devoid of the previous night's softness. It was the Dawn's voice. "Livia, listen to me." "No, I won't listen." Panic was overwhelming her, a cold tide. "You can't force me to do this. I'm leaving, right now. I'll call a cab and—" "You don't understand," Massimo interrupted, and the harshness in his tone silenced her. He stepped toward her, and the power emanating from him was almost a physical force, pinning her in place. "There is no leaving, not anymore." The moment Nonna said those words, the story began to be written. If you walk out that door now, you won't be Livia Romano, the art appraiser. You'll be the woman who dishonored the Dawn of the Cacciatores. Their excuse for a war. He moved closer, his dark eyes boring into hers, forcing her to see the brutal truth she was trying to deny. They wouldn't just come after me, Livia. They would do anything to protect their secrets. You will be a loose end, and they are very, very good at making sure their secrets stay buried. You cannot afford to be their target. A knot of ice formed in Livia's stomach. The air felt too thick to breathe. The life she knew, her books, her auctions, the quiet safety of her apartment, was disintegrating with every second she remained in that room. It was the Nonna who spoke next, her pragmatic voice cutting through the emotional tension. "The girl is frightened, Massimo. Stop circling." She approached, her pale blue eyes fixed on Livia. "Listen carefully, child. This is the story you will live from this day forward. You met a year ago, in Paris. He was there on business. You were appraising a collection at the Louvre. It was fast, intense, love at first sight. Each word was a brushstroke on a canvas depicting a life that was not hers. You kept the engagement a secret on my orders," the matriarch continued, tapping her cane lightly on the floor for emphasis. "The negotiations with the Vitucci family were delicate, a necessary alliance. To announce another engagement would have been an insult, would have destabilized everything. So we waited. You were our secret, the true choice of Massimo's heart, waiting for the right political moment to be revealed." The lie was so complete, so detailed, it was almost beautiful in its audacity. It covered every loose end with a cold, relentless logic. "It's a weak story," Massimo said, his voice full of doubt. It's a love story, the nonna corrected, a hint of steel in her voice. And love, my grandson, is the only thing more unpredictable and dangerous than the politics of these families. They will believe it because it is more interesting than simple betrayal. They will gossip, they will speculate, but the foundation of honor will remain intact. You did not break your word. You merely hid your heart. She then did something that shocked Livia to her core. The old woman reached out and touched Livia's face. Her fingers were thin and surprisingly strong, her skin like ancient paper. But the gesture held no warmth. It was possessive, a claim. You are an intelligent woman, the nonna said, her blue eyes searching Livia's. I can see that. You know how to appraise the value of things, so appraise this. On one side, your old life, which no longer exists. On the other, a new life, beside the most powerful man in this city. A life of luxury, of protection. All you must do is play a part. The part of a woman in love. The nonna stepped away and opened a small drawer in the dresser. Her movements were precise. She took out a black velvet box. With a click, she opened it. Inside, on a bed of faded satin, lay a ring. It was an antique-cut diamond, surrounded by sapphires in a platinum setting. It wasn't ostentatious, but it radiated a timeless elegance and a quiet power. A history. My mother's engagement ring, Massimo said softly, his tone reverent. And now it is yours, the nonna said, taking the ring from the box. She took Livia's left hand. Livia's hand was cold as ice, limp. Isabella Vitucci was expecting to receive a ring today. It is vital that she sees this on your finger first. With unshakable firmness, she slid the ring onto Livia's fourth finger. It fit perfectly. The weight of the ring was crushing. It was cold against her skin, a circle of metal and stone that chained her to this lie, to this family, to this man. Livia stared at the jewel glittering on her hand. The sapphires were as blue as the nonna's eyes, cold and deep. She felt hot tears well in her eyes, but she swallowed them back. Crying, she realized with a terrifying clarity, was a luxury she could no longer afford. She lifted her gaze from the ring to Massimo's face. The guilt was there, etched into every line of his expression. The night before, the connection they had shared, felt like a memory from another life, a life where choices were still hers to make. They arrive in 20 minutes, the nonna said, her task complete. Come down in 10. Wear the silk robe from his closet. You need to look like a couple who has just woken up, interrupted, but undeniably in love. Livia, do not speak unless absolutely necessary. Just look at my grandson as if he is the center of your universe. The rest, we will handle. She turned and left the room, the click of her cane marking the time left in Livia's old life. Alone again, the silence in the room was different. It was no longer intimate. It was the silence of two conspirators, two strangers bound by the same dangerous fate. Livia, Massimo began, his voice softer now, the harshness replaced by an infinite weight. I'm sore. Don't. She cut him off, her voice firm, surprising herself. She looked down at the ring on her finger. Don't be sorry. Feelings are what got us into this. She finally looked up at him, and the frightened woman was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. Someone forged in the terror of the last few minutes. Tell me exactly what I need to do to survive this breakfast. Massimo watched her for a long moment, a new admiration dawning in his eyes. He saw the strength beneath the fear, the steel beneath the silk. He gave a slow, serious nod. Don't flinch when I touch you, he said, his voice low and urgent. When Don Vitucci looks at you, meet his gaze, but then look to me as if for reassurance. Remember Nonna's story. Paris. 1 year. A secret. He paused, his face grim. And no matter what happens, no matter what they say or do, you love me. You have loved me for a long time. Your life depends on them believing it. Outside in the distance, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway reached them. A dry, final sound. Massimo glanced at the window, then back at her. They're here. The silk robe was a lie. It was soft and luxurious against Livia's skin, but it felt like a shroud. Every step she took beside Massimo, descending the grand, winding staircase, was a step away from herself. The marble beneath her bare feet was cold, a shock that ran up her legs, but not as cold as the ice in her veins. Massimo didn't hold her hand. Instead, his hand rested on the small of her back, a point of warmth and command. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was tactical, a constant reminder of her role, and a means to guide her, to steady her, should she falter. "Don't flinch," his voice echoed in her mind. She fought the instinct to pull away from his touch, forcing her muscles to relax under his palm. She took a shallow breath, the air seeming to hold no oxygen. The smell of strong coffee and toasted bread wafted from the dining room, an aroma of domestic normality that was obscene in its contradiction to the terror suffocating her. As they reached the dining room door, Massimo paused for a fraction of a second. He leaned in, his face close to her ear. His lips brushed her skin, a gesture that to any observer would look intimate. "Remember," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "You are the lady of this house now. Act like it." Then he guided her inside. The room was bathed in morning light from a wall of French doors. The dining table, long enough to seat 20, was set for only 4 at one end. The nonna, Elena Cacciatore, sat at the head, her posture as straight as a steel beam, a delicate porcelain cup in her hands. The other 2 turned as they entered. The man was older, perhaps in his 60s, with thick gray hair and broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his expensive suit. There was a stillness about him, a predator's immobility that made every hair on Livia's body stand on end. His eyes, a piercing light brown, locked onto her, devoid of any emotion but cold analysis. This was Don Marco Vitucci. He didn't need to shout to command fear. His presence exuded it like a fragrance. Beside him sat a young woman of stunning, dark beauty. Straight black hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes were as dark as Massimo's. She wore a blood-red dress that contrasted violently with her pale skin. Her lips, painted the same color, were pressed into a thin line of contained rage. Isabella Vitucci, the spurned fiancée. Her eyes flickered past Massimo and landed on Livia with a venomous glare of humiliation and hatred. The silence in the room was a living thing, heavy and pulsating. The only sound was the soft click of Don Vitucci's cup as he set it on its saucer. "Marco, Isabella," the nonna said, her voice as calm as the surface of a lake before a storm. "You're early." "We had a family matter to discuss, Elena," Vitucci answered, his gaze never leaving Livia. "It seems you do as well." Massimo guided Livia to the table, pulling out a chair for her beside him, facing the Vituccis. His hand never left her back. The gesture was possessive, final. "Nonna, I believe introductions are in order." "Indeed," the matriarch said. She gestured with her hand toward Livia. "Marco, Isabella, this is Livia Romano, my grandson's fiancée." The words were delivered with devastating simplicity. Isabella Vitucci gasped, a sharp cutting sound in the silence. Her fists clenched in her lap, her red-painted nails digging into her palms. Don Vitucci remained impassive, but Livia saw a muscle jump in his jaw. "Fiancé?" Vitucci's voice was dangerously soft. "The word that reached my ears was agreement, an agreement between our families, sealed with the union of our children." "And that agreement would have been an honor, Marco," the nonna replied, never flinching. "Had Massimo's heart not already belonged to another." Livia felt all eyes on her. Blood roared in her ears. "Look at him. Act like he's the center of your universe." She lifted her gaze and met the burning fury in Isabella's eyes. The young woman leaned forward, her body as tense as a snake ready to strike. "Who are you?" Isabella hissed, the question dripping with contempt. "What family are you from? Romano? I've never heard of them." Livia's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind went blank. Paris. 1 year. A secret. The instructions spun in her head. She opened her mouth, but she felt the pressure of Massimo's hand on her back increase slightly. A warning. Don't speak. Obeying the silent command, she did exactly as he had told her. She met Isabella's furious gaze for a second, allowing the other woman to see the vulnerability, or what could be interpreted as shy love, in her eyes. Then she turned slowly and looked at Massimo. She poured all of her terror, all of her confusion, and her desperate need to survive into that look. She looked at him as if he were her only safe harbor in a stormy ocean, as if his presence alone could give her the strength to breathe. Massimo accepted her gaze, his own face softening instantly. The shift was so convincing that for a moment, Livia herself almost believed it. He took her hand on the table, lacing his fingers through hers. "Livia's family is not of this world, Isabella," he said, his voice firm, but with a protective, tender edge that was meant only for her. "And that is why we kept it a secret. To protect her." "To deceive us," Don Vitucci spat. "To honor a commitment of the heart that came before any business arrangement," Massimo countered, his gaze turning hard as steel as he faced the other Don. "Livia and I have been together for over a year." That's when Isabella saw it. Her breath hitched again, and her dark eyes locked onto Livia's hand, now held on the table by Massimo's. They locked onto the cold fire of the diamond and sapphires. "The ring, the proof. That—" Isabella's voice trembled, the rage giving way to a raw, humiliated pain. "That is your grandmother's ring. It was supposed to— It was for—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The sight of that ring, the ultimate symbol of the Cacciatore lineage on another woman's finger, was a declaration of war louder than any words. Don Vitucci's face darkened. The calm in his expression shattered, revealing the volcanic fury beneath. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly on the polished floor. The power emanating from him was overwhelming, a wave of contained violence that made Livia shrink in her chair. "You have dishonored me in my own home, Elena," he said, his voice low and lethal, directed at the nonna. "You have made a fool of me, you and your grandson." Massimo rose as well, subtly placing himself between Livia and Vitucci's rage. Their bodies were like two kings on a battlefield, ready for combat. "There was no dishonor, Marco," said the nonna, the only one still seated, the only one who seemed completely unperturbed. She picked up a piece of toast from a silver basket. "Only a complication. Sit down. We will have coffee, and then we will discuss how to turn this complication into an opportunity." The silence that followed was the sound of two empires deciding between peace and annihilation. And Livia Romano, the art appraiser, sat directly on the fault line, the ring on her finger, a detonator waiting to explode. The nonna's suggestion, so audacious in its banality, hung in the room charged with testosterone and wounded honor. "We will have coffee." It was the kind of line that disarmed rage by its sheer inappropriateness, forcing the impending violence into an awkward pause. Don Vitucci remained standing for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. His piercing brown eyes moved from the nonna to Massimo, and finally back to Livia. She felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure, a brutal assessment that dissected her, layer by layer. She forced herself not to look away, remembering Massimo's instructions. She met his stare, not with defiance, but with a frightened stillness, and then deliberately broke eye contact to seek out Massimo's hand again. The gesture was small, almost imperceptible, but it screamed dependency. It said, without words, "I do not belong here, but I belong to him." Slowly, like a king returning to a throne he felt had been usurped, Marco Vitucci sat down. The creak of the chair was the only sound in the room. Isabella remained rigid, her face a mask of humiliation, but she followed her father's lead. The nonna nodded, as if peace had never been in doubt. "Good." She signaled to a maid who stood, motionless as a statue, by the door. The woman moved forward, and, with hands that did not tremble, began to pour coffee. The sound of the dark liquid hitting the porcelain was unnaturally loud. "Opportunity!" Vitucci's voice was a low growl, the fury simmering beneath a thin layer of control. "I see an insult. My daughter, promised to the head of the Cacciatore family, only to be cast aside for her." The nod in Livia's direction was so slight it was almost a twitch, but it was laden with contempt. "Isabella is a woman of great value and beauty," the nonna said, with a diplomatic calm that bordered on insolence. "She deserves more than a political marriage. She deserves an alliance that places her in power, not beside it." Isabella's chin lifted, a spark of interest glinting in her angry eyes. Her father, however, was not moved. "Do not change the subject, Elena. This engagement was to unite our families, to solidify our operations at the port, to present a united front against the Irish who think they can move in on our territory. And it still can be, Massimo said, speaking for the first time since he'd sat down. His voice was calm, the voice of a leader, not a young man in love. He released Livia's hand, though he kept his near hers, a silent reminder. A wedding is not the only way to seal an alliance. He leaned forward, his forearms on the table. The passion of the previous night was gone, replaced by a strategic coldness that Livia found both fascinating and terrifying. This was the true Don. The agreement on the port stands, Massimo continued. The percentages we offered stand. In fact, as a gesture of goodwill, for the pain this revelation has undoubtedly caused Isabella, I am prepared to increase your share by 5%. Vitucci's chin rose a fraction of an inch. 5% of the port operations represented millions. It wasn't an apology. It was a payment. A business transaction to appease wounded honor. And what do we get for being publicly humiliated? Isabella asked, her voice sharp. Money? You get power, the Nonna answered before Massimo could speak. She turned to the young woman, her pale blue eyes locking with the dark ones. Your engagement to Massimo would have made you the Don's wife. A position of influence, yes, but always secondary. Now, I propose something different. She paused, ensuring she had everyone's full attention. The Cacciatore family has control of 3 seats on the Longshoremen's Union Board, seats that control who works, who gets promoted, who oversees. We will give one of those seats to you, Isabella, directly, in your name. Isabella blinked. Even her father looked surprised. A seat on the Union Board wasn't a jewel or a dress. It was real, raw power. The ability to give and take jobs, to control the flow of information, to build her own base of loyalty. A board seat? Vitucci mused, the strategist's mind weighing the offer. That is, unprecedented. These are unprecedented times, Massimo said. A woman on the board, a Vitucci. Imagine the message that sends. Not of weakness, but of a new strength. A modern alliance, built not on wedding vows, but on mutual power and respect. Livia listened, stunned. They were redrawing the map of New York's underworld at the breakfast table, and she was the unwitting catalyst. Her night of passion had turned into a renegotiation of territories. She looked down at her own hands, at the diamond and sapphire ring. It was beautiful, but it felt radioactive, a source of dangerous power she had no idea how to control. Isabella looked at her father, a silent conversation passing between them. The anger in her eyes was still there, but it was now tempered by a cold ambition. She was calculating her worth, the price of her humiliation. And the wedding? Isabella asked, her voice still tense, but with a new note of negotiation. What of your wedding? It will be soon, the Nonna said firmly. Quiet, but official, to solidify the story, to show that Massimo's heart was always committed. Once the wedding happens, any talk of dishonor dies. That gives us little time to retaliate, should we decide your offer is insufficient, Vitucci said, the threat veiled beneath the words. There will be no retaliation, Massimo stated, and the authority in his voice left no room for argument. There will be a partnership, stronger than before. The Cacciatores and the Vituccis, together. My personal life, he gestured toward Livia, no longer interferes with business. In fact, it has strengthened it. Now that the truth is out, we can move forward without secrets. Livia felt a chill. The truth. The word was a bitter joke. They were piling lie upon lie, building a fortress of falsehoods around her, and she was the prisoner at its center. Don Vitucci looked at his daughter. Isabella? Isabella was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on Livia. It was a final, appraising look. I want ownership of Warehouse 7. In my name. Not my family's. Massimo didn't hesitate. Consider it done. Isabella nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee cup, her hands now perfectly steady. Then it seems we have an agreement. She gave a small smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And it seems I should welcome the bride. She raised her cup toward Livia. Welcome to the family, Livia. I hope you'll be very happy. The sincerity was as absent as warmth from an iceberg. The line was both a promise and a threat. It was an acceptance of the truce, But not the end of the war. The war had just become personal, transferred from the battlefield of the dawns to the territory of a woman's heart. Livia, feeling a response was required, picked up her own cup. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to project. She raised the cup, the ring on her finger flashing in the morning light. "Thank you, Isabella," she said, her voice a whisper. The breakfast continued in a haze of tense formalities. They discussed shipping details and union politics, while Livia sat in silence, a ghost at her own engagement feast. She was the reason for all of it, and yet she was completely invisible. She was an object, a bargaining chip, the secret fiancé, whose only purpose was to exist and look devoted. When the Vituccis finally left, a heavy silence settled in the room. The nonna stood, her face impassive. "It worked," she said, more to herself than to them. "For now." She turned to Massimo. "The wedding will be in 2 weeks, in the family chapel. Only the closest circle. Isabella and her father will be guests of honor." She looked at Livia, a look that stripped her of any illusions. "Start learning your role, girl. The first act is over, but the play has just begun, and the audience is far less forgiving." She left the room, leaving Livia and Massimo alone with the remnants of breakfast and the crushing weight of the lie that now ruled their lives. The moment the sound of the nonna's cane faded down the hall, Massimo's facade of control disintegrated. He didn't explode in anger. He imploded. The energy in the room shifted, the tension of negotiation replaced by a heavy, almost palpable weariness. He pushed away from the table and went to the wall of windows, placing both hands on the cool glass, his forehead resting against it. His broad shoulders, which had carried the authority of a dawn, now seemed to carry the weight of the world. Livia remained seated, her body rigid. The ring on her finger felt like it weighed 10 pounds. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere in the house. It was a methodical, relentless sound, marking the seconds of her new life. She watched him. The morning light outlined his silhouette, making him a dark figure against the day's brightness. She could see the tension in the back of his neck, the muscles corded beneath his skin. The man who had kissed her with desperate hunger, and the dawn who had negotiated the fate of empires were the same person, and she was chained to both. A cold, powerless anger began to build in her chest, directed not just at him, but at herself, for her naivety, for her weakness. 2 weeks. Her voice cut through the silence. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of her sentence. Massimo didn't turn. "It's how long we have to make the lie real enough that no one dares question it." "Real?" A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "There's nothing real about this. I'm a piece on your chessboard, Massimo. A piece you sacrificed to protect your king." He finally turned, and the agony in his eyes silenced her. It was a raw, unguarded pain, something she suspected few in the world were ever allowed to see. "Do you think I wanted this?" His voice was low, hoarse. "Do you think I planned to destroy your life along with my own?" "Your life doesn't look destroyed," she retorted, the venom in her voice surprising herself. "You're still the Dawn. You're still in control." "Control?" He crossed the room in a few long strides, stopping on the other side of the table. He didn't yell. His voice was more frightening for being so contained. "I control nothing. I inherited a crown of thorns, Livia. I spend every day of my life making choices I hate to protect people who, most of the time, don't deserve protection. I deal with men like Vitucci, men who smile at you while calculating the best way to put a knife in your back. Last night," he stopped, running a hand over his face. "Last night was the first time in years I wasn't the Dawn. I was just a man. And you were just a woman. And for a few hours that was real." Livia's heart gave a painful lurch. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, a naked truth in the middle of the castle of lies they were building. She hated herself for it, for the weakness, for the small part of her that melted at his words. "And now?" she whispered, her anger being eroded by confusion. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, practicality returning to his tone. "We start building our history, not for them, for us. We need details. We need a foundation we can stand on under pressure." He pulled out a chair and sat opposite her, the negotiator returning. "My grandmother said Paris, the Louvre, a year ago. We'll start there." And so, in a lavish dining room that felt more like a prison cell, they began to weave the tapestry of their fictional love. It was the most surreal conversation of Livia's life. He asked questions, and she answered, her historian's mind working mechanically to create plausible facts. "What's your favorite restaurant in Paris?" he asked. "L'Ambroisie," she answered without thinking. "But it's nearly impossible to get a table." "I would have gotten one," he said, with a simplicity that was both arrogant and factual. "What did we eat?" "I would have ordered the fouilleté de truffe blanche, and you would have had the tournedos de bœuf." "How do you know?" "You seem like a man who appreciates the classics," she replied, and a ghost of the previous night's flirtation passed between them, uncomfortable and out of place. They talked for hours. They constructed their first meeting, their first conversation, their first kiss, which they decided happened on the Pont des Arts under a light rain. They spoke of secret phone calls, clandestine trips to cities where no one would know them. Every added detail was another bar on her cage. Livia felt a strange duality. One part of her, the analytical part, found the exercise almost academic. The other part felt every lie like a small death, an erasure of who she truly was. At some point, a maid came in silently and cleared the breakfast dishes. No one suggested lunch. "You need clothes," Massimo said suddenly, looking at the silk robe she still wore. "Your things are still at the hotel. I'll have someone fetch them, but it's not enough. You are a cacciatore's fiancé now. You need to look the part." "I don't want your clothes. I don't want your money." "It's not a matter of want," he said, his patience wearing thin. "It's a matter of necessity. You are a reflection of me now, and I am a reflection of you. Every detail matters. The way you walk, talk, dress. Isabella will be watching your every move, looking for a crack in the facade. And if she finds one," he didn't need to finish. Later that day, a woman named Sophia arrived. She was older, with a gentle face but eyes that missed nothing. She was, Massimo explained, the family's personal dressmaker for decades, and, more importantly, she was discreet. Sophia took Livia's measurements in respectful silence, while Livia stood, stiff and uncomfortable, in her undergarments. She felt like a mannequin, an object being prepared for display. High-fashion catalogs were brought in. Dresses, shoes, coats. A wardrobe for a life that was not hers. "I like neutral colors," Livia said quietly, when Sophia showed her a vibrant red gown. "Black, gray, beige." "The Don likes blue on you," Sophia replied softly, pointing to a royal blue silk dress. "He said it brings out your eyes." Livia froze. Massimo had given instructions. He wasn't just building a wardrobe. He was painting a portrait of his fiancée, detail by detail. The presumption of it took her breath away. The forced intimacy. That evening, dinner was served in the same dining room. The nonna was present, as was Massimo. The food was exquisite, the wine expensive, but Livia could barely swallow. The conversation was superficial, avoiding the elephant in the room. They talked about art, about an upcoming auction at Sotheby's. For a moment, Livia felt almost normal, talking about something she loved. "The Italian Baroque period is fascinating," she said, forgetting her role for an instant. "The way Caravaggio used chiaroscuro to create drama." "Massimo always had a fondness for Caravaggio," the nonna interrupted, with a small smile. "It's one of the many things you two have in common. He told me that's what you talked about for hours, that first night in Paris." Livia's blood ran cold. It was a test, a subtle trap. She looked at Massimo, panic rising. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod. She forced a smile, her heart pounding. "Yes, it was. We talked so long we almost missed our dinner reservation." The nonna nodded, satisfied. The test had been passed. After dinner, when the nonna had retired, Massimo led her to the library, the place where it all began. The scent of leather and old paper hit her, a bittersweet reminder of the woman she had been just 24 hours ago. "You did well today," he said, his voice low. "I don't want your praise," she answered, turning to the shelves so she wouldn't have to look at him. "It's not praise, it's an observation. You're a survivor." She traced the spine of a book, the same one she had touched the night before. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Where will I sleep?" The question hung in the air, laden with a weight neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Their lie demanded a proximity that reality made unbearable. "The master suite is mine," he said, his voice tense. "It has a connecting closet and bathroom. There is an adjacent dressing room with a daybed. It's comfortable. You can sleep there. For now." For now. 2 words that promised a future she didn't want and couldn't escape. "Appearances are important," he continued. "We enter the suite together. We leave the suite together. What happens behind closed doors is ours." She nodded, her back still to him. She heard his footsteps approach. She braced herself for his touch, but it didn't come. He just stood behind her, so close she could feel the heat from his body. "I know you hate me right now, Livia," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't blame you. But for this to work, for us both to survive, the world needs to believe you love me. And maybe, just maybe, the most important person you need to convince is yourself." The days that followed blurred into a surreal routine, a choreographed dance of lies. Livia would wake each morning on the daybed in the dressing room to the distant sound of Massimo's shower. The space was luxurious, lined with cedar and rows of his expensive suits, but to her, it was a cell. They would emerge from the master suite together, he with a formal nod, she with her eyes lowered. At breakfast with the nonna, they would perform. His hand would find hers on the table, his thumb drawing slow circles on her skin. Small gestures that would look natural to any observer. But that made Livia's skin tingle with a mixture of revulsion and an electric current she refused to acknowledge. The afternoons were for lessons. Massimo would take her to his study, the same room where he had kissed her, a memory that now felt desecrated, and instruct her. Not on the family's business. He spared her that. But on the family itself. He showed her old photographs, naming the forgotten faces of uncles, cousins, and grandparents. He told her anecdotes from his childhood, small stories a lover would know. "This is my Uncle Enzo," he said one day, pointing to a smiling man in a faded photo. "He taught me how to sail. He always brought almond pastries from Sicily. It's your favorite pastry." "I don't like almonds," Livia responded automatically, her voice flat. Massimo looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "As of today, you love them." She learned the names of their enemies and the fragile alliances that kept them alive. She learned about the code of silence, the omertà, and about the importance of honor, the same honor that had imprisoned her here. Each fact was a brick, building the persona of Livia Cacciatore, fiancée to the Don. And with every brick laid, Livia Romano, the art appraiser, felt herself being buried alive. Her only escape was the library. She spent hours there, surrounded by the comforting silence of books. It was the only place in the house where she felt she could breathe. One afternoon, as she examined a 17th century atlas, Massimo came in. He said nothing, just watched her from across the room. "This map is wrong," she said, more to herself than to him. "They still drew California as an island." "They drew the world as they understood it at the time," he answered, his voice soft, based on incomplete information and a great deal of hope. She looked at him over the top of the book. "Like us." The shadow of a smile touched his lips. A sad smile. "Exactly. We're drawing our own map, Livia, and praying it doesn't lead us off a cliff." In those moments, the barrier between them would thin. She saw the man beneath the dawn, the prisoner in his own fortress. She hated herself for feeling a pang of empathy. It was a weakness she couldn't afford. Their first public appearance was the most terrifying. One evening, Massimo simply announced, "We're going out to dinner." Panic surged in Livia's throat. "Out? Where?" "To Daggiani's. It's neutral territory. But we will be seen. That's the point." Sophia helped her dress. The gown was the royal blue silk one Massimo had chosen. It fit her body like a second skin, elegant and undeniably expensive. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked confident, like she belonged in that world. It was a visual lie. Massimo was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt unbuttoned. His eyes raked over her, and for an instant, the appreciation in his gaze was so genuine, so raw, it took her breath away. He said nothing, just held out his hand. She took it, her own hand cold and damp, his warm and steady. The restaurant was crowded. The murmur of conversation died as they entered, followed by a ripple of whispers. Livia felt dozens of eyes on her, dissecting her. She forced herself to keep her head high, her gaze fixed on Massimo. His hand on her back guided her, a constant, reassuring presence. They were seated at a secluded table in the back. "Don't look around," he said in a low voice as he studied the menu. "They want to see your reaction. Just look at me." And she did. They made light conversation about wine and art, the same safe topics from their rehearsals. But under the table, his knee brushed against hers, a deliberate contact that sent shockwaves through her body. To the world, they were the picture of a couple in love, absorbed in each other. To Livia, it was the performance of a lifetime. Halfway through dinner, a man approached their table. He was older, with shrewd eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. "Massimo," the man said. "Good to see you. And this must be the mysterious woman the whole city is talking about." Massimo stood, shaking the man's hand. "Antonio, good to see you. I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Livia." Livia forced a smile, her heart pounding. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine," Antonio said, his eyes flicking down to the ring on her finger. "A well-kept secret. My congratulations to you both." The encounter lasted only a minute, but by the time Antonio left, Livia was trembling. "Who was that?" she asked, reaching for her wineglass with an unsteady hand. "The head of the Genovese family," Massimo answered, as if discussing the weather. "An ally, and the biggest gossip in New York. By morning, everyone will know they saw you, and that you looked utterly in love." That night, back in the safety of the mansion, the tension between them had changed. The public performance had bonded them in a strange way, like two soldiers who survive a battle together. As they prepared for bed in their separate quarters, he paused at the door to the dressing room. "You were trembling," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He stood there for a long moment, his silhouette framed in the doorway. The desire to go to her, to comfort her, was an almost physical force. He clenched his fists at his sides, fighting the impulse. To touch her out of need, out of comfort, would be to cross a line they could no longer ignore. It would be admitting the charade was becoming something more. "You didn't show it," he finally said. "You were strong." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Massimo." He looked back. "Thank you," she whispered, "for tonight, for guiding me." He gave a slow nod, his dark eyes intense. "We got through it together." He closed the door, leaving her in the darkness of the closet. Livia leaned against the cool wood, her heart pounding. "We got through it together." The words echoed in her mind. It was a dangerous admission, an admission that they were no longer just a captor and his prisoner. They were partners in a life-or-death lie, and that forced partnership was starting to feel dangerously like trust. She put a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic beat. She told herself it was just fear, adrenaline, but deep down, she knew it was a lie. A week before the wedding, the rain began. It wasn't a summer shower, but a cold, persistent autumn drizzle that wrapped the Cacciatore mansion in a gray shroud, isolating it even further from the outside world. The dampness seemed to seep into the stone walls, and a melancholic quiet settled over the house. Livia found refuge in the library, as she always did. She was curled in a worn leather armchair near the fireplace, where a low fire crackled and hissed, fighting against the damp. A book lay open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. Her eyes were fixed on the dancing flames, her thoughts a whirlwind. Their performance at the restaurant had changed something. The dynamic between her and Massimo had grown more complex, fraught with a tension that wasn't just fear or resentment. There were moments she would catch herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed in concentration when reading a document, the shadow of a smile when the nonna said something particularly sharp, the loneliness in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She was cataloging the details of him, not as part of her assignment, but from an impulse she couldn't name. It was dangerous. It was a betrayal of herself. The library door opened, and Massimo entered. He paused when he saw the fire, then walked to the built-in bar in a dark corner of the room and poured himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. They were past those small formalities. "The jeweler called," he said, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "The wedding bands are ready." Livia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Wedding bands. Another symbol. Another link in the chain that bound her. She said nothing, just clasped her hands in her lap. He came over to the fireplace, stopping on the other side of the fire. The amber glow of the flames danced across his face, highlighting the hard lines of his jaw and the shadows under his eyes. He looked tired. "I had a meeting with my consigliere today," he said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "He informs me the story has spread. Antonio Genovese did his job. We are now the talk of the town. The powerful Don Cacciatore, tamed by a mysterious art scholar." "That's good, isn't it?" she asked, her voice low. "It's what you wanted." "It's what we needed," he corrected. "But it creates a different problem. Now expectations are high. On the wedding day, everyone will be watching, looking for the epic love that justifies the risk I took." "I'll do my best to look adoring," she said, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. His dark eyes met hers over the flames. "I'm not worried about your performance, Livia. I'm worried about mine." The confession caught her off guard. She had always seen him as the puppet master, the one in control. The idea that he too felt the pressure, that he too was afraid of failing, was disarming. "What do you mean?" she asked. He took a sip of whiskey, his gaze lost in the flames. "I've spent my entire life learning to hide what I feel, to be impassive, to project power, not affection. To show vulnerability in this world is like bleeding in a shark tank." He looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart stumble. "But when I look at you, the lie becomes hard to maintain." The air in the room grew thick, charged with unspoken words. The sound of the rain against the window panes and the crackle of the fire were the only noises in the world. "I don't know how to look at you at the altar," he continued, his voice hoarse, "and pretend at a love that began as a sham, without the truth of what I feel showing in my eyes." Livia felt a hot blush creep up her neck, betraying the calm she tried to project. "And what is the truth, Massimo?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, a bold and terrified whisper. He didn't answer right away. He finished the whiskey in a single gulp and set the empty glass on the mantel with a sharp click. He walked around the fire, each step slow and deliberate, until he stopped in front of her chair. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level, his knees almost touching hers. The scent of him enveloped her, whiskey, rain, and that masculine fragrance of sandalwood. It was intoxicating. His dark eyes searched hers, looking for something she wasn't sure she wanted him to find. "The truth," he said, his voice barely audible, "is that the night we met was not a mistake. It was the most real thing that has happened to me in a decade." He lifted his hand, the hesitation in his gesture making it all the more potent, and held her face gently. "The truth is, I spend my days pretending for the world, but the biggest charade is the one I put on at night, in my room, pretending I don't feel your absence on the pillow next to me." Livia couldn't breathe. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild, uncontrolled rhythm. It was madness. It was wrong. And yet, it was undeniably real. "The truth, Livia," he whispered, leaning closer, his warm breath on her skin, "is that I'm falling in love with my pretend fiancé, and that's going to get us killed faster than any bullet from the Vituccis." And then he kissed her. It wasn't like the first kiss, born of passion and desperation. This was different. It was slow, a kiss of confession, a moment of quiet truth amid so many lies that made her tremble. The book slid from her lap, forgotten on the floor. Her hands, acting of their own accord, went to his hair, her fingers tangling in the thick strands, just as they had on the first night. But this time, it was not to pull him closer in passion, but to steady herself in a world that had just been turned upside down. She responded to the kiss, a silent surrender that came from a place deeper than fear or self-preservation. It came from a place of loneliness, a recognition that he, the man who had imprisoned her, was also the only person in the world who understood the nature of her cage. When he finally pulled back, their faces were still inches apart. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes closed. They were both breathing heavily. This, she began, her voice shaking. I know, he interrupted, his voice filled with a resigned pain. This complicates things. He stood, pulling away from her, the warmth of his proximity instantly gone, leaving her cold. He went to the window, staring out at the rainy night, his back to her. The wedding will proceed as planned, he said, the Don's voice returning, though slightly unsteady. The charade must continue. But from now on, closed doors must remain closed. What happened here just now? It cannot happen again. It's too dangerous. For both of us. Livia sat in the armchair, her body trembling, the taste of him still on her lips. She looked at the man standing at the window, a silhouette of power and loneliness. He was right. Their feelings were the real danger. The lie they told the world was meant to save them. But the truth they had just confessed to each other was the only thing that could utterly destroy them. The following week was a refined form of torture. The kiss in the library hadn't cleared the air. It had electrified it. Now, every shared glance, every accidental touch in public, every formal good morning was charged with the weight of what had happened between them. Massimo's rule, it cannot happen again, hung between them, an invisible but steel-solid barrier. They were like two planets caught in the same orbit, pulled by an undeniable gravitational force, but doomed never to collide. Livia threw herself into the final wedding preparations with a desperate energy, using the details as a shield against her own feelings. She met with florists, tasted cakes, and approved menus, all with a cool efficiency that impressed the nonna. To the matriarch, it was a sign that Livia was finally embracing her role. To Livia, it was a survival mechanism. If she focused on the color of the roses, maybe she wouldn't remember the softness of Massimo's lips. The wedding dress arrived 2 days before the ceremony. It was not something she had chosen. It had been commissioned by the nonna, created by the same dressmaker, Sofia. When Livia saw it for the first time, her breath caught in her throat. It was breathtakingly simple. Heavy ivory silk, with long sleeves, a modest neckline, and a cut that followed the curves of her body before falling into a graceful train. There was no lace, no pearls, no ostentation. It was a gown of timeless, powerful elegance. A queen's gown. When she tried it on, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror, a sense of unreality washed over her. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, beautiful, serene, about to marry one of the most dangerous men in New York. A single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek. She angrily wiped it away before Sophia could see. On the eve of the wedding, the mansion buzzed with a restrained energy. Flowers were delivered, the family chapel was prepared, and the scent of polished beeswax hung in the air. The peace with the Vituccis was fragile, and this wedding was the final seal. Everything had to be perfect. That night, dinner was a tense, quiet meal. The nonna offered curt, practical advice about the following day, more like a general briefing a soldier than a grandmother speaking to her granddaughter. Massimo barely looked at Livia, his face an impenetrable mask. The distance between them at the dining table felt like a chasm. After dinner, as Livia rose to go to her room cell, the nonna's voice stopped her. "Livia, come with me, there is something you must see." Panic leaped in Livia's chest, but the nonna's tone allowed no refusal. She followed the matriarch down hallways she'd never traveled, to a wing of the mansion that felt older, quieter. The nonna stopped before a heavy oak door and opened it. It was a child's room, or rather, a shrine to a child's room. Everything was draped in white sheets, but the shapes of a crib, a dresser, and a rocking chair were visible beneath the fabric. The air was still, smelling faintly of lavender and dust. "This was Massimo's father's room," the nonna said, her voice softer than Livia had ever heard it. "My son, Antonio." She walked to the window and stared out into the darkness. He was a good man, strong, honorable, but he loved too much. He fell in love with a woman from outside our life, an artist, bright, full of life, but fragile. She didn't understand our world, the rules, the sacrifices. The nonna turned, her pale blue eyes locking on Livia. They married. They had Massimo, and for a time they were happy. But this world, it corrodes everything pure. A war between the families began. Threats were made, and Massimo's mother couldn't handle the pressure. The fear broke her. She left when Massimo was only 5. Simply disappeared. Left him. Livia's heart ached for that 5-year-old boy, abandoned in a world of violence. She finally understood the source of the melancholy in Massimo's eyes, his fear of vulnerability. "I see the same strength in you that I saw in her," the nonna continued, taking a step toward Livia. "And I see the same danger. Massimo is beginning to love you, child. Not a pretend love, but a real one. And love is the greatest weakness for a man like him." She stopped in front of Livia, her wrinkled face serious. "Tomorrow, you will become a cacciatore. This family will protect you with its life, but in return, we demand your loyalty. Not just your performance, your loyalty. You cannot break his heart as his mother did. You cannot abandon him. Because if you do, if you weaken him, you will not just be destroying a man. You will be destroying an empire. Do you understand the burden you are taking on?" Livia felt the weight of those words, the history of generations, settle on her shoulders. This was no longer about her survival. It was about the survival of everything they stood for. "I understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Good," the nonna said. She then took Livia's hand and placed a small, cool object in her palm. It was a silver locket, old and slightly tarnished. This was Massimo's mother's. "Wear it tomorrow. Something old. It is a lie that holds a truth. You carry his history with you now." The nonna left her alone in the quiet room. Livia opened the locket. Inside, there was a space for a photo, now empty. She closed her hand around the cool metal, the object seeming to burn her skin. Later, in her room, she couldn't sleep. The conversation with the nonna, the weight of the locket, the imminence of the next day. It was too much. On an impulse, she stood and opened the door that separated her from Massimo's room. He was awake too. He stood by the window, just as he had on the rainy night, looking out at the city. He turned as he heard the door creak. His eyes widened slightly, seeing her there, in the dim light, wearing a simple silk nightgown. Neither of them spoke. Words were unnecessary. The rule he had said "it cannot happen again" felt fragile, irrelevant, in the face of the abyss of the next day. He held out his hand. It was a silent invitation, a plea, a surrender. She walked to him, the floor cool beneath her bare feet. She placed her hand in his. He gently pulled her close, not with passion, but with a deep, silent need. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. Her scent, a mix of gardenia soap and just her, filled him. She clung to him, her head resting on his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. His body was warm, solid, a refuge. In that embrace, they were not the Don and his pretend fiancé. They were just a man and a woman, frightened and alone, finding solace in each other on the eve of the battle of their lives. "Stay," he whispered against her hair. The word was a plea. "Tonight, just stay." She didn't answer with words. She just tightened her hold. And that night, in the large bed that was supposed to be the stage for their lie, they simply slept, side by side, finding in each other's warmth a silent truce before the dawn that would change everything forever. It was a deeper, more terrifying intimacy than any kiss. It was the quiet acceptance that the lie, somewhere along the way, had surrendered to an undeniable truth. The wedding day dawned bright and cold. A pale autumn sun poured through the mansion's windows, but it brought no warmth. To Livia, the light felt harsh and interrogating, illuminating every corner of the sham that was about to become a sacrament. She woke before Massimo, slipping silently from the bed and back to the solitude of her dressing room. The night's truce was over. The intimacy of sharing a bed, of finding refuge in an embrace, made the reality of the day even more unbearable. It was one thing to perform a lie for the world. It was quite another when the lie began to feel like the only truth left. Sophia and 2 other maids prepared her as if dressing a doll for display. Her hair was swept into a low, elegant chignon, a few loose tendrils framing her face. Her makeup was subtle, designed to enhance a natural glow she didn't feel. Finally, the dress. The ivory silk was cool against her skin. As Sophia fastened the long row of tiny, silk-covered buttons down her back, Livia stared at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was a bride. She was a vision of serenity and grace. A wave of dissociation washed over her, as if she were watching someone else's life. She put on the silver locket the Nonna had given her. The metal was cold against the warmth of her neck, a heavy reminder of the history and the burden she now carried. The bride was ready. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It was the Nonna. The matriarch entered, impeccably dressed in a dark gray skirt suit. Her pale blue eyes swept over Livia, from head to toe, in a final inspection. There was an almost imperceptible nod of approval. "You look beautiful, child," she said, her voice devoid of sentimentality. "Remember your role. Today, you are not just a bride. You are a symbol. The symbol of peace, strength, and the future of the Cacciatore family. Do not falter." "I won't," Livia answered, her voice steadier than she felt. The family chapel was an intimate, austere space at the back of the estate. The walls were dark stone, the stained glass windows casting jewels of colored light onto the polished wooden pews. The air smelled of incense, white lilies, and candle wax. It was full, but not crowded. Only the most important family members and closest allies were present. Livia saw the Vituccis in the front pew, Don Marco, his face a mask of neutrality, and Isabella, stunning in an emerald green dress, her dark eyes fixed on her with an unreadable intensity. It was a mixture of hatred and assessment. Isabella wasn't looking for love. She was looking for a flaw, a crack in the performance. The organ music began to play, a low, solemn sound. Livia's heart hammered in a rhythm so violent she feared everyone could hear it. There was no father to walk her down the aisle. She walked alone. Every step on the stone runner was a step toward her sealed fate. Then her eyes found his. Massimo was waiting at the altar, beside an elderly priest. He wore a flawless black suit, the cut emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. He didn't look like a nervous groom. He looked like a king awaiting his queen. But as their gazes locked, she saw past the Don's facade. She saw the man from the night before, the vulnerability he guarded so fiercely. There was a question in his eyes, a silent appeal. "Are you with me in this?" In that moment, Livia made a choice. She would not play the part. She would live it. For these few minutes, she would allow herself to believe the lie, for her survival, and for his. She gave him a small, genuine, reassuring smile that seemed to melt a layer of ice from his posture. When she reached the altar, he held out his hand. His touch was warm and steady, enveloping hers. The familiar electric current passed between them, but this time it was not unwelcome. It was an anchor. Then they turned to the priest, hand in hand. The ceremony began, the words in Latin and English echoing off the stone walls. Livia felt as though she were in a dream. She heard the words, honor, loyalty, in sickness and in health, till death do us part, and they took on a dual meaning, a weight the other guests could not comprehend. When it was time for the vows, Massimo turned to face her. He took both her hands in his. The outside world fell away. There was only him. "I, Massimo Cacciatore." His voice was low and clear, resonating in the silent chapel. "Take you, Livia Romano, to be my wife. I did not plan for you. I did not expect you. And now, I cannot imagine a world without you." His dark eyes were so overwhelmingly sincere that Livia felt her defenses crumble. "I promise to honor you, to protect you, and to be your safe harbor in any storm. I promise that the truth we build together will be stronger than any lie the world tells us. This is my solemn vow." Tears welled in Livia's eyes. Tears she didn't bother to hold back. They were tears for the beauty of his lie, and for the terrible truth that lay beneath it. It was her turn. She took a deep breath, her gaze locked on his. "I, Livia Romano." Her voice trembled but did not break. "Take you, Massimo Cacciatore, to be my husband. I came into your world by accident, but I choose to stand by your side by choice." She squeezed his hands, feeling the cool locket against her chest. "I promise to be your confidant, your ally, and your peace in a world of war. I promise to keep your secrets and honor your name. And I promise to find the truth in our journey, no matter how difficult the path. This is my vow." The silence in the chapel was absolute. They had just declared their vows not only to each other, but to all their allies and enemies. They had set their story in stone. The rings were exchanged, simple platinum bands, cool and heavy on their fingers. "You may kiss the bride," the priest said. Massimo leaned in, his hand coming up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her shudder. The kiss was not for the audience. It was for them. It was slow, deep, a seal on everything that had been said and unsaid. It was a promise of solidarity, an acceptance of their shared fate. The taste of him was familiar, a mix of strength and the vulnerability only she knew. When they parted, the chapel erupted in polite applause. Massimo kept his forehead pressed to hers for a moment, a sanctuary of silence amidst the noise. "Mia Mowgli," he whispered, the words meaning, "my wife, now and forever." He took her hand, and they turned to face their guests, to face their future. As they walked back down the aisle, Livia's gaze met Isabella Vitucci's. The young woman was no longer smirking. Her face was pale, and in her eyes, for the first time, Livia did not see hatred. She saw something far more dangerous: belief. They had done it. They had convinced them all. But as they stepped out of the chapel and into the cool autumn sun, Livia looked down at the wedding band shining on her finger and at the man whose hand she held. The lie had saved them, but at what cost? They had just spoken the truest vows of their lives, based on a fundamental falsehood. She was Livia Cacciatore, the accidental bride, now bound not just by duty, but by feelings as real and as dangerous as the world she had just married into. The play was over, but real life, with all its unpredictable consequences, was just beginning.